welcome back to another episode of Madness and Meaning with Kelly and Amanda.
Oh, hi.
Yeah. So today we want to talk about the concept of shame and how shame comes up and presents itself inside of a healing journey. And I think how I really want to approach this conversation to start is anchoring into this realization that I had recently, where when we're feeling uncomfortable inside of ourselves in our life, to the point where it becomes too hard to ignore anymore, is when we tend to say, I need a change, I need help. And that is when we take action to get help. And that is where the personal development or healing journey really begins. Except there's a component of shame or judgment inside of that realization. I can't do this anymore. This isn't working. I'm not good, quote unquote, doing well. I need help. And there's some judgment inside of recognizing that you're in pain and something needs to change. And that pain and that judgment propels you to take action in a new way. So there's shame inside of that aspect of the healing journey. And then on the flip side, and this is not in every case, but this is common enough that I've noticed it, where so many of us can feel a little bit embarrassed that we need to get help or that we need to make a change in the first place and kind of hold it close to the vest, not wanting anyone to know, not wanting people to find out that we're not doing well, not wanting to share this aspect of our lives with anyone. In terms of people, friends and family outside of this healing journey, and also sometimes with the coach or therapist or counselor that we're seeking help from, sometimes it can be really challenging to open up to them too, even though they're there to help us. And so there's sort of shame coming up on both sides of this self-development and healing journey, which I think is super fascinating. And I would love to explore why this happens, how shame both propels healing and also can kind of be a little bit of a block inside of it, and how to recognize that this might be coming up for you and learn to change your relationship with that aspect of this part of your journey so that you can navigate it with a little bit more ease, a little bit more compassion, and a little bit more acceptance of what's unfolding for you. So, Kelly, why don't we start around how shame can be the starting point of a healing journey for somebody and how that can unfold inside of the healing journey in terms of how it presents itself and how it can create sticking points too.
Yeah. Maybe providing some context around like what the experience of shame is and what it can look and feel like. Because my context around it is that it is associated with that belief system of there's something wrong with me, or I'm not good enough, or I'm too much, or I'm fatally flawed in some way. And these wounds around our self-perception and our self-worth create an experience that we've labeled as shame. And I think shame is essentially the experience, an emotional experience in the body that's perpetuated and confirmed by the beliefs about ourselves that there's something wrong with us, or that we're bad, or fatally flawed, or not enough, or too much, etc. Whatever that story sounds like for you. And that emotional experience is more precisely felt more in the gut. So somatically, we tend to feel this experience of shame inside of our stomachs when we are in a position where we feel shame, when we feel embarrassed or we feel uncomfortable in who we are or vulnerable in some way where someone is going to see a part of us and might reject us or abandon us. That tends to create the experience of a contraction in our lower system, in our stomach, in our gut, accompanied by thought patterns of shame. So not being good enough, there being something wrong with you, et cetera, et cetera. And so that pain or that suffering that we experience of shame is is the experience of those thoughts and the experience of those feelings, but it's also our relationship to them. Because suffering is not necessarily the thought and it's not necessarily the feeling, but it's that we're experiencing those thoughts and feelings and we're not allowing ourselves to. And so we're at war with or in resistance to the experience of shame, which creates a lot of our suffering. And this is where the irony comes in that you were referencing a bit earlier, where it is that experience of being in pain that tries to propel us outside of it, which might propel us onto a healing journey or some kind of journey. Like I'm feeling not good enough, I'm feeling shame, so I'm going to try to work on myself in some way to overcome that feeling. But then at the same time, it's because we're operating from that place of trying to avoid or overcome the experience of shame that actually keeps it there. And the experience of shame and being in avoidance to shame, not actually feeling safe inside of our capacity to process shame is actually what holds us back a lot in the process of healing and growth. Because we don't want to be seen, because we're afraid of being rejected or abandoned or judged, and because we don't want to be vulnerable in front of someone who might confirm or validate our shame.
Something I really want to highlight is that relationship that creates the shame, where we tend to believe there is an aspect of who we are that is wrong and that needs to change in order for us to escape that feeling of shame. And once we have changed something, overcome something, um, done something different with our lives, we'll no longer have to feel that anymore, and the shame will be gone. But what's interesting to note is it's not the thing that's necessarily giving you the shame, it's how you're perceiving yourself in relation to that thing. And it doesn't matter what you change outside of you, if that belief system about you in relation to that thing still exists, then the shame will continue to come up for you in new and different ways. And so that pattern of shameful thoughts, feeling shameful feelings inside of you is not necessarily going to go away if we focus on the external aspect of this transformational process, which tends to be our first area of focus for this kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. And so when we are experiencing so much shame and we're not okay with that experience of shame, then that propels us into trying to overcome it through a healing journey or some kind of self-development journey, working on ourselves in some way so that we can fix this problem, which is that we're not feeling comfortable in who we are. We're feeling shame about ourselves and inside of who we are. And so when we are operating from that place, and we've both seen it and experienced it personally, like everyone that we've ever worked with has come to us with underlying shame. Whether they realize it or
Absolutely.
not, they probably didn't realize it.
Anytime you want to change something about you, it's coming from a place of shame.
Yeah, which I think is a very bold statement that I do agree with. But I think there might be some people who would be skeptical of that.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah. And I might even have a small amount of skepticism of it, mainly from this point of view of, does it have to be like that 100% of the time? Because I agree that it's like that by default. Like most of us, when we want to change something, it's coming from a place of shame. Can you ever arrive in an experience of life and an experience of yourself where the desire to change is actually just coming from the desire to experience something pleasurable or fun
I
or
think so. And
yeah,
at the same time, I think
right.
there's a small part of you that's hoping to escape something in the process.
Yeah.
I think it's both. I think they both live at the same time. Anytime you're looking to make a change of any kind, a transformation, a change in location, a change in relationships. It's because you're looking to move towards something and away from something at the same time. And we can define it as something, shame tends to have like a gravity to it. I think it tends to be associated with a very deep, dark, heavy feeling. And maybe embarrassment or judgment can feel like it might be less heavy. But there's definitely something that you're trying to, a degree, like a pain point that you're trying to move away from in order to embrace something that feels lighter and more acceptable.
Yeah.
That's my interpretation anyway.
I agree with that. And I think that there's like a spectrum that we start to move on as we go through the processes of learning to own our shame and actually deeply healing and doing the shadow work and just evolving as a soul living in a human experience where the desire to change and to grow starts to come more so from a place of moving towards pleasure than it is moving away from pain. And that's a good place to be. And I think if I were to try to assess like where I'm at in that process, I feel like I might have landed in a place where it's like 50-50 now. It's like it used to be like everything in my life was my desire to escape pain and to try to escape my shame within myself. And that's still definitely, definitely. But then I can also feel like this lighter thing that moves me. In my life, it's not like this heaviness that's like dragging me forward because I need to escape where I am, but it's more like this lightness, this desire to like float towards pleasure and expansion and excitement and fulfillment in life as well. And it's interesting to be able to acknowledge that in one single process, like one specific situation where we could be wanting to move towards something or wanting to change or heal or develop ourselves in some way can be coming simultaneously from the desire to escape shame and also to move towards pleasure and expansion and excitement.
When you say that you feel like over time, any change you make is coming less from a place of moving away from pain and more over time, it's coming from a place of wanting to move towards pleasure. Do you think that's because you feel less shame inherently?
No.
Really?
Yeah,
Can you explain that?
100%. I think it's not that I feel less shame or have less shame, but it's that my relationship with it has changed exponentially to where my capacity to feel shame and to process it and to hold space for it is significantly higher than it was when I was more unconscious and just reacting to the suffering of shame by trying to overcome it.
So you no longer shame your shame.
Yes.
Okay. This is a
Yes.
really good point because when it comes to creating change in our life, wanting to heal something, wanting to feel better, wanting to move away from pain, there is an aspect of wanting to not be seen inside of that process because of the shame we feel inside of it. And yet, in order to change your relationship with with shame, there's an aspect of finding comfort inside of being seen that is required.
Yes.
And so, how do you come to terms with that? How do you slowly begin to find comfort inside of being seen, feeling seen when it feels so uncomfortable to do so because of the amount of shame that is there?
Yeah. The discomfort is so much more our relationship to it than it is the actual thing being uncomfortable. And what I mean by that is when we say it's uncomfortable, and I think everyone can relate to what you're saying, where it's like being seen in my vulnerability, and when I'm feeling shame, like it's just so uncomfortable. It is, but it's not because the actual experience of it is uncomfortable. It's because you're experiencing it and believing that you shouldn't be, or believing that the fact that you're experiencing it means something about you. That's problematic. So, like, as an example, we might automatically, and this is happening unconsciously, it's not like a conscious thought. But when we're experiencing shame or feeling really uncomfortable in who we automatically believe that that's happening because there's something wrong with us, because there's actually a reason to be feeling the shame. When there's not actually a reason to feel the shame is just there. Like it's just a fact. It's just, it's an energy. It's an experience that you're having in your body and in your lived human experience that actually doesn't mean anything about you and about who you are whatsoever. But it's when you make it mean something about you, which we do automatically. We're always attaching meaning to everything that we're seeing, witnessing, and experiencing in our lives. And so when we have that experience and we make it mean that there's something wrong with me, I'm feeling shame, I'm feeling uncomfortable, and that means that there's something wrong with me, then we don't want there to be something wrong with us. And so we resist that experience. And then by resisting it, we create more discomfort inside of it because we're directly being at war with reality. There's reality happening, which is I'm having this feeling, I'm having this experience of myself, and that's wrong. That shouldn't be happening. That's always going to create suffering 100% of the time. But when we can break out of that automatic association and question the automatic idea that I'm feeling shame and therefore that means something wrong about me, and upgrade that perspective to something that sounds more neutral, which is that like I'm feeling shame. Like that's it. Like no story about it. Just I'm feeling shame right now. And when we remove the story and we just be with the truth of it, I'm having an experience labeled shame and it feels tight in my body. It's making me want to hide. I'm starting to describe what the experience is, not describing why we're experiencing it. Is when we start to create an experience of what I'm just going to call safety in that emotional experience. Because it's no longer something that's problematic that needs to be fixed, but it's more by tuning into what it really is and starting to open up to the curiosity of what shame is really in the present moment, not why it's here, but what it is. Then you start to notice, well, this is a contraction in my stomach. This is a this is a flushing feeling of my skin. This is a feeling of just like wanting to curl into a ball. And when you start describing it for what it is, it becomes less scary, it becomes less intimidating, and it just becomes sensation, really. Sensation that you're moving through, an experience that you're moving through, not a problem that needs to be fixed immediately.
What I find really fascinating about working through shame and also wanting to hide away from the world as you do so is that when you don't want someone else to see you inside of your own process because you're worried about what they might think about you or what they might say about you, that is a representation of your shame, not about that person's opinion about you.
That's right.
And so you are just further shaming your own sense of self, your own interpretation of you and the process that you're moving through. And so there really is only your relationship with you here, and it has nothing to do with anyone else. And it can feel very challenging to let someone witness you inside of a moment of vulnerability when you're holding that judgment around it. But ultimately, the more you can ease into allowing that, you begin to see that there can be safety there. And when you shift your perspective of what's really going on, which is that you're just having an experience of you and you're interpreting it in this way, and that's why it's feeling this way, then you can see that it's actually not as threatening as you once believed it to be. And it makes the process of moving through it and releasing it so much easier, especially if you're no longer hiding from the counselor or coach or therapist that you hired specifically to help you work through that. And I'm sure you've dealt with this before, but I've had clients feel very uncomfortable sharing things with me. Even going back to my days as a personal trainer, they didn't want to tell me their weight. They didn't
Mhm.
want to tell me what they ate in a day. And I could just feel their discomfort sharing that information with me because they were so afraid of what I would say or what I would think when they hired me to help them in the first place.
Mhm. I want to use that example and like really get into the nitty-gritty of it because I think that's a
Okay.
beautiful example. So let's just to say hypothetically, because this isn't actually how it was, but hypothetically, let's say that there's a person that you're asking them questions, you're trying to gather information about them, and they have so much shame in that vulnerability of telling you honestly that information about themselves, and you can feel it, and it's potent. And in this hypothetical scenario, let's just say that you have their permission to go there with them and to support them in moving through that process, and they're willing to go there. What would be the next step? If someone is like in a huge shame spiral and really feeling terrified of being witnessed inside of that vulnerability, if you had full permission to go all the way with them and you had it your way, what would you do?
To witness themselves first and foremost is what I would want to guide them into because ultimately that's what they're fearing. Their fear of my opinion of them is a projection of their own opinion of them. And so finding safety inside of just witnessing themselves inside of this moment rather than trying to get rid of it, avoid it, hope it goes away, hope no one sees it, hope they can push it down and move past it would be the first step that I would take, me personally. And I would do that through a more somatic exercise. So taking the story away from the experience completely and having them sit and experience it as just energy moving through so that I, as soon as you go about it that way, it shifts the entire experience completely. It no longer feels like shame or like embarrassment or like judgment. It just feels like sensation. And then it would be the mindset work would come after that to begin to take a look at, okay, what are the stories they're telling themselves about this situation and how much truth is there inside of it? That's the approach I would take.
That's brilliant. I love it.
I mean, it's what you stated previously. But I think that somatic work, and it's so interesting. I just started incorporating somatic work into home. It's not well understood and it's not well utilized. And yet it's like it's the way forward because it's so hard to overcome this from a mental place to tell yourself, oh, I shouldn't feel this way, or it's so silly to think this about me, or I just need to do something different and then I'll feel better. And it doesn't have the effect that we always want it to when we always find ourselves back in the same place. And when you can see that you're an energy being, everything is energy. And when you can just witness energy flowing through you without any narrative as to what it is, then you become this open vessel of allowing, just allowing all things to be and to move. And that's where freedom is found.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah. And I think that that is so it becomes kind of easy to understand. At least this is my experience. Is I started to understand how necessary it was to create a different relationship with shame, especially. Like I was able to see through a lot of self-reflection, self-awareness in my own journey that running away from my shame was creating almost every problem in my life. Like it was very obvious to me. And knowing that and under like having an understanding of somatics and having education around that and understanding that shame is just an energy, it's an experience that isn't bad. It's not something that needs to be overcome or avoided, but rather felt, accepted, and processed. And I think that I had a really really good understanding of that and believed in it wholeheartedly for like 2 years before I actually was able to experience it. Because there's such a strong, innate lack of safety around shame. And the way that I understand it in my brain and how I try to explain it to myself is using that scale of consciousness by Dr. David Hawkins, where he like kind of rates the frequency level of the different emotions, right? Like there's the enlightenment and love and everything at the top. And then at the bottom, it's like grief, shame, fear, like all of that. And shame is like at the very bottom, meaning that it is like the densest. At least this is how I understand it. I might be completely wrong, but it's like the densest feeling in the body. Like it's the least comfortable when we're moving through it. And my experience of that, it's so funny how we can know that shame is okay and that all it needs is to be felt and have such a hard time doing it. Because even to this day, I find like when my shame gets activated, it's like, like, gotta run away from it, need to fix it.
Yeah, it's like when you're like lying in bed going to sleep and then you have an embarrassing memory of something that happened in like third
Yes,
grade. And it's like, oh, like I wish I didn't think about that. Go away. I don't want to remember that that ever happened.
so
It's like
true.
it's like, and then you can't fall asleep.
Oh, that happens to me so
I
often.
know, me too. What my guides are showing me is that energy is energy, and the only energy that truly exists is love. But it's our interpretation of what the energy means that gives it meaning and sensation that feels uncomfortable.
Right.
And it's all a projection of your own like level of consciousness and how you see you inside of this experience. And that is ultimately where the manipulation of your experience takes place. It takes place inside of your idea of you. And if something embarrassing happened to you in the past, you don't want to allow that to happen again because of how you felt in that moment. To be laid bare in front of people is a very vulnerable thing to go through. Let's say something embarrassing happened to you in front of a group of people and their reaction caused you to feel shame. It's this cultural societal dynamic that's creating the interpretation of that situation and not the energy itself. It's
Mhm.
that feeling of rejection from the group, the feeling of isolation from the group. And that meaning that we attach to that scenario then creates our projection on top of it and the feeling that we feel inside of it. And when we can change how we feel inside of ourselves and how we think about ourselves and think about life, then it is possible to experience this energy completely differently, where shame doesn't really feel like shame anymore. There is just no experience of shame. It's
Mhm.
us that creates the experience of shame. Does that make sense?
It makes so much sense. And there's something that you said that I want to like pull out
Yeah.
and I want to dissect this a little bit more because
Yeah. Okay.
I've never explored it from this point of view. And I don't even know if this is going to go anywhere, but I think it's an interesting point that you mentioned about how there's only love. Like really the only energy that exists is love. And so what I hear when you say that is that shame is love. And where I really think about that, if I try to explain that to myself of how is that true, shame sort of does feel like an invitation to love.
I have a note about that.
Do you?
Yeah. Yeah. But keep going.
Well, if shame is love, when we're feeling shamed, it's an invitation to love a part of ourselves that we've been under the illusion is unlovable. To think about it like that and to be able to uphold, and this is new to me, so I can't say from experience, but I can only imagine that being able to uphold that perception of the experience of shame in a moment when you're feeling shame and being able to recognize like this sensation is just like waving the flag, like, hey, I'm inviting you to love this about yourself. Wow, that would be life-changing.
It's a signal that a part of you is needing a little bit more love in that moment, that there's
Yeah.
room to open up to more of it, and that there's a part of you that has forgotten the truth of who you are in that moment. And the experience of shame, of pain, of suffering is an invitation.
Yes.
If you're open to looking at it that way, is an invitation to opening up to more love, to shifting your experience of that energy into something different.
Mm.
And
Wow.
going along this avenue of thought, it's not that shame is a more dense energy, it's that our experience of ourselves in that moment creates the density of that energy because energy is just energy.
Mm.
So technically, fear, shame, sadness, that is not an earth experience. Like it's just energy. It exists everywhere. It is you. Like you are made up of energy. You are energy, but it's our because of the experiences we have as humans that are very complex, that we have this biological human mind that has a lot of survival mechanisms built in that color our experience of ourselves from a biological perspective and also from an upbringing and societal norm perspective. We color our experiences of ourselves through those lenses, and it creates that dense feeling. And think about it this way, your interpretation of what creates shame for you might be different from mine.
Mm.
So it's not that shame is shame, it's that you're experiencing shame because of a belief system about you in that moment. Someone that's very prideful might feel really good that they feel pride about something, whereas someone else might feel shame that they feel pride because they believe that feeling pride is not right or not good.
Wow. Yeah.
It's all interpretation.
Yeah. I love this.
But to
I,
see it that way, you have to see it, you have to feel it objectively first.
yes.
Yeah.
And so if you could give someone like a next step, we've already kind of discussed it, but I think someone who's listening, who's starting to at least have an understanding that there is an opportunity for them to experience shame differently than they currently do. How do you practice that in real time?
The way I would go about doing it now is very different than how I would go about doing it years ago because of the
Yeah.
lens through which I see myself, the world, and the work that I do. And so I always take on a bit of a more spiritual dynamic inside of it because that just feels good to me. It makes sense to me. And so that's how I would approach it, which is that is it possible to have a little bit more of a zoomed out approach of yourself in this moment where you can see that this human part of you is feeling embarrassed about something, is wanting a part of you to change, wants to leave something in the past and no longer relive it. And at the same time, be able to see that it's just that human part of you that's experiencing it. And it's possible to see yourself through a new lens, which is that you are this energetic being having this human experience, and the experience of shame doesn't necessarily have to exist. It just
Mm.
exists for you in this moment because of your conditioning or because of this biological component of survival that our mind uses to see the world and ourselves inside of it. So it's kind of this dual approach to life where you're experiencing it as your human self and you're also you can expand beyond that and see, oh, there's another way that I can look at this and there's another way that I can experience this if I choose to. And holding that perspective then allows you to have a more objective experience of your shame when you can go through the somatic exercise of it, feel the energy, and realize, oh, this energy I'm feeling is only being colored as shame because of the perspective through which I'm seeing it. But if I know that shame is kind of a human paradigm, it's not really what I'm feeling, then your experience of those sensations can become very different. And you can anchor into one of, what if this is not shame? What if what I am feeling is a misinterpretation? And what if it's
Wow.
truly love wanting to move through me and I'm just contracting around it and not allowing it to because I have been interpreting it as something different?
Oh, that's so brilliant. Like, what if this is love wanting to move through me and I'm not allowing it because I'm contracting around it based on my interpretation of it? That just needed to be highlighted because imagine if we had the awareness and the capacity to drop into that acknowledgement throughout the day and throughout the week. Like how that would shift how we react to the world, what we say yes to, what we say no to, who we open up to, who we let in. Like that is so profound.
Great. I'm glad.
Yeah.
When you can go through life seeing everybody around you as just misinterpreting their experience and searching for something that's already there that they're just misinterpreting, it's so much easier to have compassion.
Wow.
It's so much
Yeah.
easier to see the divine being reflected right back at you, which is ultimately, in my opinion, what you are witnessing. And it's
Mhm.
so much easier to be forgiving both of yourself and others. It's so much easier to be compassionate both of yourself and others, and to not take things so personally, and to be more open to experiencing yourself in different ways where you might feel guilt or shame in a certain situation. Maybe it becomes easier to let that go a little bit.
Wow.
Did not see it taking this turn today, but this is an
Yeah.
interesting take, huh?
I love it. I think that this is so applicable too, because approaching the topic of shame, it's so easy to talk about it from a conceptualized place. And that's what I was referencing earlier, where it's like conceptually, I understood that shame happens and my avoidance of shame is the problem and causes a lot of things in my life. And that I need to be able to hold space and process my own shame if I want to really be able to move forward in a powerful and aligned way. And while knowing that and even preaching it to my clients and trying to support them in that process, man, is it so easy to still fall victim to the misinterpretation of shame as you're labeling it. And so I feel like I even have more to sink my teeth into from this conversation as far as being able to drop in, or I guess even kind of zoom out first, zoom out of the process of shame or zoom out of the experience of shame directly and be able to acknowledge, how am I interpreting this? And what am I making this mean about me? And then bring in this new understanding that this experience is not bad. It's love being offered to me. It's an opportunity of love for a part of myself that needs it right now. And the only reason why it's so uncomfortable is because I'm contracting around it.
In the spiritual space, we say you are the creative creator of your own experience. And that typically tends to get filtered through the manifestation lens. I can create my outcomes. And when I create my outcomes, then I can be happy.
I love this
It's,
part.
I get very frustrated with the manifestation talk. However, there's nuance to this that gets overlooked. And the creator that you are means the energy that you are. the experience that you're having inside of the energy moving through you. And you are the channel. Energy is constantly being channeled through you to create your reality through manifestation. We're always manifesting, we're never not manifesting. And so, anytime you're feeling a physical sensation in your body, that's energy trying to move through you to create through you. But when we contract around it, we keep it stuck because we're creating meaning that that energy means something negative about who we are. We're feeling sad, we're feeling frustrated, we're feeling shame. And so that energy gets stuck there because it's trying to move through an open channel, love, and
Mm.
to create through you from that energy. But we close ourselves off when we're feeling ashamed of who we are, and that energy gets stuck, and then we feel it. It feels horrible, and then we push it down. And that's when we develop aches and pains and all kinds of physical manifestations of that self suppression. And so when you can see it through this lens of, oh, this is actually not shame, I'm just labeling it as that. It's actually love. It's just pure divine potential trying to move through me as a channel. Then you can release the tension inside of your physical body, open back up again, and channel it through you from that perspective. I am love. I am perfect. I am okay. And that's where you manifest from that higher frequency. So it's not about changing your thoughts necessarily to think more positive thoughts to create things from that energy. I mean, it is and it isn't at the same
Yeah,
time. It's a little bit more nuanced. It's remembering who you are, not telling yourself a positive story, but remembering the truth of who you are, to be open to all experiences of you. And it's not to say that shame is wrong to feel and that if you can't see it as love, that that's bad, because it's really
right.
challenging to do.
It is.
But just holding that perspective inside of a really painful experience might enable you to have a little bit more compassion for yourself inside of it, and remember that don't have to be so hard on yourself. And
Yeah.
just that alone, that little doorway that it opens up for you does facilitate ease of that energy a little bit more.
Yeah. That softening, I think that you're referencing, I just want to point out that that's all so many of us are after right now. Like the value of those moments where we can just pop out of the tight, restricted fight or flight and into a bit of softness. Like we all just are desperate for that. And let's not overlook the opportunities that we have to access that, even if they're minuscule, even if it's just a moment of like fighting, fighting, fighting. What if this is just love? And then just letting yourself be there for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. That is what we need more of. And collectively, I think the more that we pursue the opportunities that we have to drop into that and be there for even just a few seconds, like, is that not going to change the frequency of the planet?
And
Like,
that's
I
the
have no
gift.
doubt. Yeah.
That is the gift. It's the opportunity for those few seconds that you're giving yourself. It's not changing your reality. Like
Yeah.
it's not manifesting a thing. It's the gift of creating a different experience of you for just a few minutes or a few seconds. And then the if you can do it once for just a few seconds, then you can do it a second time. And then
Mhm.
eventually momentum builds, and you are literally re-envisioning you in that moment. You are creating a different version of you. You are creating a different you through a different paradigm. So it's not necessarily think a different thought. It's literally become a different you.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to offer my experience of this recently because being able to put yourself in this experience would be helpful. But there have been so many moments recently, and I've been very aware of this, where I will be fighting, contracted, like just so like "Ah!" about my human existence. And then just have a moment where I just feel held. I feel supported. I feel at peace. I see the humor in it. Like it can look a lot of different ways. It can be an acknowledgement of a synchronicity, or it can be an acknowledgement of like maybe this thing that I thought I wanted that I'm not going to get now actually wasn't what I wanted, and maybe this is a good thing. It can be these little moments where I go from like super restricted, super contracted, super like in the resistance of my reality to a softening to it. And those moments when I realize that that has happened, when I'm able to sit there and be like, 5 seconds ago, I was freaking the fuck out. And right now I feel ease in my body. And being able to just be like, wow, that was cool. How fast it can change and how drastically it can change. And also how nice it is to just let myself linger here for a minute. I feel like there's something so value about that. And I don't even know how to communicate the value of it because I'm in real time experiencing it very recently. But it's a shift that I've noticed in myself that is so extreme because I think my experience of this in the past has been like default, freaking out, contracted, blah, blah, blah. And then I'll have a moment where I realize like I feel okay or like I feel a softening. But as soon as I realize that I feel the softening, I'm like, no, I shouldn't feel this. Because a few seconds ago I was freaking out, or 5 minutes ago I was freaking out. I should be freaking out. There's something to freak out about. And then I'll work myself back up. And I won't let myself linger in the experience of just feeling held for a moment and safe. And the shift for me has been in my prioritization of those moments and really allowing myself to like drink them in. And it's feeling really good. And I think that there's something incredibly life-changing about it that I can't even put into words yet, but I have almost no doubt that there's something that comes from that.
What I'm being shown is that when we have this pattern of associating a feeling with something, so like fear, stress, anger, shame,
Yeah.
then when we finally open to let it move through, like that's how we interpret it because we are interpreting that sensation with that thought. And it requires time, like in practice and consistency to be able to like take an exhale and open and relax and not to revert to that pattern
Totally.
of thought. And when you are used to being like clenched tight for like 37 years, and then you suddenly just be like, wait, I can open. It
Yeah.
feels overwhelming because you are suddenly like, oh my God, there's all of this spaciousness. I don't know what to do with it. Close back up again.
Mm,
There's like almost a safety inside of being in your tiny little box. And so it
yeah.
takes time to like peek a toe out. I can open. Okay, I'm going to close back up again. I can open. And then once you can open, close, you can open a little bit more and more gradually over time, and it becomes less threatening to live from that place.
Mhm. We always say at the beginning of our episodes recently that more recently than in the beginning, that we both have no idea where the episode's going to go and we have like no plan for it. Like we both have just been like, I don't know, let's just start recording.
But isn't this a really interesting reflection to life? Because we
Yeah.
always think that we need to have a plan. We always have
Mm,
to have certainty. We always have to know where we're going. We always have to have like an indication of what's going to be said or done. And it doesn't always go to plan.
tell
But
me about it.
sometimes that works out for the best when you just go in open with an open channel, the energy can flow through you and inspiration can come and kind of guide you. We're just not used to seeing it that way because we're taught to look at ourselves in life through a different lens. But the
Mhm.
gift in being closed off from your divine nature and then slowly recognizing that you can open to it is having the experience of both and the experience of learning how to open. It's like the learned experience and the fulfillment and self-satisfaction and pride that you can feel in that learning is also an experience in and of itself that is extremely fulfilling.
Yeah. Wow. I don't know if I have anything else that I want
I
to add
think
to
we
this.
I think we explored this in a really interesting way. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think we can tie a bow on it. Would you
Tied.
like to sum this up?
Sure.
Okay.
Let's do it. Um, the shame in healing, the shame in personal development. I think that that's something that we all experience. I don't know if we're all aware that we're experiencing it, but I want to just come back and re-highlight that there's always going to be, unless you're like super enlightened, but if you are, then why are you here? There's probably always going to be this experience of when you want to change something or create something different in your life, there's there's an aspect of yourself that's feeling shame that you're trying to escape, whether you acknowledge that or not. And it's not that the shame is bad, but acknowledging that it's there and being willing to perceive it differently rather than perceiving it as the fact that this is here means that there's something wrong about me or about my life, but rather the fact that this is here means that I'm being offered an opportunity to bring love to an aspect of myself that needs it right now. I think that you're going to have such an easier time, not necessarily because you're going to get more of what you want or that you're going to get out of your own way and that's going to mean manifestations are going to happen easier. You can just do this every time we talk about manifestation now.
Absolutely.
I think that's brilliant. But it's going to mean that you're you're going to experience so many more moments of that softening. And it's in those moments of softening that guidance can come through. And not only is it going to come through, but we're going to be able to hear it and trust it and follow it so much more fully. And it's inside of that guidance that we're always going to be brought somewhere that we want, whether we realize that we want it or not.
I think shame on the healing journey is normal and natural. And if you find yourself not wanting to share your experience or this part of your life with people, I think honor that. That's where you
Yeah.
are right now, and that's totally okay. Nobody has to know what you're going through and why, and it can be a private experience for you and you alone. And what I would like to offer inside of that is inquire what it could feel like to open up about your experience and witness the discomfort of other people as their shame journey and whether or not you're actually perceiving any judgment from them at all. And perhaps it was all a fear that lived inside of you the whole time. Thank you all so much for another fabulous episode, and
Yeah.
we will see you next week.